Good afternoon. So as Jason just mentioned, I'm going to be presenting the web seminar this afternoon entitled Using the Database for Inventory, Monitoring, and Assessment, previously referred to as the Rangeland database. Everyone should be able to see a PowerPoint slide at this point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure everybody could hear me and see what I was looking at. So my name is Ericha Courtright. I work for the USDA ARS for Not Experimental Range. For some of you, you might be familiar with the website that is listed at the bottom of the first slide. This is the place where you can access the most up-to-date version of the database and view other information that we're starting to post regarding the database. So we'll get the business portion of the seminar. At the beginning of this presentation, and his email address is listed. So our agenda today is I'm going to show you how to go about setting up your database, talk about quick uses of the database versus long-term uses. We're going to actually enter a little bit of data, and depending on how much time we'll talk about that data. And then we'll wrap up by talking about future web seminars, evaluating this seminar, and taking any questions anybody might have. If at any time you find that I'm moving too quickly or you didn't catch something, by all means stop me and we'll back it up. So at this point I'm going to switch to the database itself. So everybody should be able to see my version of the database on the screen at this point. Okay. So this is an empty database as you would take off of our website. And I'm just going to step you through how to get it set up. I prefer, even for quick uses, to take 10-15 minutes in the office and actually put in some information just to make my life easier when I'm collecting data in the field. So I'm going to start by clicking under System Setup, the support tables. And I like to start by putting in some states and counties. And I should mention at this point, this is our beta tester for the release that's going to be coming up later this month. So hopefully it's going to work properly for me. So it may look slightly different than what the one you download off the website looks like. So we're going to open up states and counties and then click on Import Counties. And I've going to browse to where I've got my counties saved. Those counties will be downloaded with the database from the website. And we'll make it interesting. We'll download the counties for California today. So once we've selected the counties, we click Do Import. It always asks if we are sure that we want to do this, if we've got it back up. We click Yes. And it's telling me that I'm using an old version, and that's fine. It won't ask you that. It's just because I'm in the beta version. And it goes ahead and adds those counties. So if we click OK at this point and close back, we can see the counties that we just imported. So at this point, we've got our counties and our state in. So we're going to go ahead and close out of this. Some of these things you can do on the fly, and we'll talk about this later, but for right now we're going to just add a few additional things. So it's always a good thing to add a few people that are going to be working on the project. So today we'll use Bob, and we'll put in that he's going to do everything just to make our lives easier as we go through the system. Anything that is in bold must be entered. The other things, organization, address, phone, email, are all optional. So at this point, we can close out of this. We'll add another person just to be safe. I'll just add myself. And I'll make myself all the roles as well. Obviously, you would define certain roles for certain individuals. Maybe you have people that are collecting data versus entering data in the office. Your land manager might be somebody that isn't even associated with the project, just owns the land itself. So you would want to designate the proper roles for each individual. So the site ownership codes are already predefined for us. If for some reason there's one that's missing, we can go ahead and add it at the bottom. So at the bottom where there's an asterisk, all we have to do is type in the code. You need to keep it fairly short, no longer than 5 letters. So you can type in whatever organization you might be associated with. Maybe you're with the University of Tennessee, for instance, and then you would define what that organization is, so later you're not guessing what you abbreviated it for. And then that will show up later in all of the lists for your site ownership codes. So next we'll talk about the state species list. By selecting it, at the bottom you have the option of doing a mass import of species data. I'm going to go ahead and select that. I cheated. I already downloaded the plant list for a state off of the NRCS website. So I'm going to just go ahead and browse it. I wanted to save time. I didn't want to be flipping through all the different screens. It's very straightforward. You just follow the instructions on the page. So once you tell it where you've saved your text file, you can decide whether or not you want the synonyms. The synonyms are previous names of different plants. It makes the list much, much longer. Today I just want the regular list, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it to validate my plant list and import by clicking on the button. And it's just going to take a second. So the state that I downloaded had 6,400 plant species. I just wanted to point out one other option here. Some of us have a designated plant list. Maybe it's a shorter list. Maybe it's a list that, of plants that we have a very specialized plant community. We don't want to have 6,000 plants. We want just 200 plants. If you have an Excel file that you've already created, you can go ahead and import that file. I'm not going to go through it today. Essentially, you just need 3 columns of data: your species code, the scientific name, and the common name. So you would have that in your Excel file. You designate what is in each column, and then it would import the information as well. So now that we have our species, we're going to move on and close out of this. At this point, we are ready to jump in and actually take the database to the field on a tablet or laptop. I find that it's always easier to put in this information rather than fight the database in the field. There is one other piece of information I'm going to go ahead and add just so that we have some additional information. I'm going to enter the ecological sites. So once again, if we click Import Site Numbers and Names from NRCS, I cheated. I've already downloaded this file, but once again, if you follow the instructions, it's very clear on how to do this. I'm going to go find where I've saved the file, double-click it, tell it that, yes, I want all the sites in this particular file, and click Validate Site List and Import into this database. And it already put in those 14 that I selected earlier, and there they are. I just quickly downloaded something earlier today. It probably doesn't pertain to the sites or the states even that I'm using. We're just using it for example purposes. So now we're going to jump back and talk about some quick uses of the database. Several individuals, including some people in our group, find that they like to collect ecological inventory data. This might be for ESDs, or it might be just because you're out looking at the landscape, trying to figure out where you're going to set up your experiment or your sites, or how you're going to actually sample what's out there. So I'm going to select low intensity ecological inventory, and I'm just going to click New. At this point, we haven't entered any site or plot information. So here we're just going to, let's call it new. You can identify whatever you want for your site, and we'll just call it 1. So at this point, this is a very basic, like you're just going to go out and walk the landscape. You can identify where you are by selecting state and county. If you know, for instance, if you already put in that MLRA information, which we did earlier, it's already there in the drop-down. It's easy enough to go back and get that information or make a note to yourself and then go back and get it when you're back in the office. So then we'll go and create a waypoint. So maybe you want to take some actual GPS coordinates and make some notes about what you're looking at. So if we click new on this, we have to give it a position number. That may correlate to pictures that we're taking or anything else, maybe notes that we're making in our notebook. At this point, we can put our GPS coordinates in if we want, also elevation, the slope, the aspect, the soil map unit, any information that would be pertinent to you regarding the process of collecting information, including the ecological sites. These are the ecological sites that I downloaded earlier. So we can just select that from the drop-down menu. You can make any notes that you want, also talk about maybe the main 3 plant species that you're seeing in this particular area, that sort of thing. And in addition, when you're back in the office, you can actually link your photo. Maybe you took multiple photos for this particular waypoint while you're out there. So we select the waypoint that corresponds to the photos that we took, and we'll just click New. At this point, it's going to reiterate which site, plot, and waypoint we're on. We're going to use today's date for the photo. Perhaps you might want to change that. We're going to tell it that the photo is now stored on this personal computer and browse to the location of that photo. At this point, it's linked to that photo, and we can give it some sort of brief description. Maybe we're looking at road disturbance, for instance. Maybe our project has to do with that. And just to double check, we can actually view the file at this point to make sure that we've linked to the correct photo. Okay, my computer's not happy. Sorry, it opened up on a separate screen. So there's my photo. And as you can see, there's a lovely road running through the middle of it. Definitely had some road disturbance there. And now whenever we go back to the spot, if we need to see the photo that we took to remind ourselves of what the area looked like before we actually set up our project, we can bring up this picture. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and close, and it logs that photo so that we can come back to it if we wish. So in addition to the low intensity inventory, we can also take a higher intensity inventory. Once again, it would just depend on your project, what kind of information you want to collect. So if we select new again, at this point, we'll just say that we're collecting the information for the same site as before. Oh, it does not like that. Excuse me. We'll just select it here. So we'll select new and 1 here since we've already set it up. Tell it that it's a existing. There it is on our list. So once again, we can click additional information. We can say, for instance, we can pick our University of Tennessee, even though that's not in California. Maybe we're doing a side project with another university. We can select who we need to contact regarding this project or who is in charge of that piece of land. We can collect various information. It is all, once again, up to you. This is all optional information. So you may want to just collect pieces of information here in terms of like the map unit symbol, the parent material, the bedrock, the community phase, or you may not. In addition, maybe you want to go ahead and dig a couple soil pits on the landscape. So you can select that location or change what you want to call that location. And in addition to doing your basic, the soil pad on depth and the rock fragments, the percent rock fragments, you can also enter it by horizon. So maybe the first layer is 0 to 20, and maybe the next layer, 20 to 40. And you would, in addition, you would add additional information regarding your horizons. And once again, not everyone collects all of this information, so you would just enter the information that you personally have collected. And we always find that it's good to note who did the soil pit in case there's some question regarding maybe the horizons weren't labeled properly, maybe there's some question about what was found on that particular site. So we always try to put in a set of initials or the person's name just so that we have some sort of reference. So I'm not going to go through all of these. We're just going to talk about the different options. There's pet-on information, including root distribution. There's also plant composition in terms of how you would like to collect that. At this point, we have our whole species list, so we could select a particular plant and go ahead and collect some of that information. I'm just going to select anything. So you can also pull in, so you would select whatever it falls into in terms of the class here. And then later, if you've already collected LPI, you can actually bring those numbers in and have them subpopulate. But since we haven't got to the LPI portion of the discussion yet, we don't have any data to pull over. There's various other information that you can put in. And once again, it's up to the user how much information or how little information they want to put in terms of the soil surface attributes, the soil taxon, and the ecological site state. That may not be pertinent to you. Maybe it is. So we have some additional, I apologize, these have my old test information in them. There's customizable forms on some of the screens. So if you click customize, you can go in and label it, I don't know, maybe you want to know how many roads there are. Maybe you want to look at erosion, and you can make notes to yourself under all of these categories. And some other fields. So you can relabel those fields, and it should have relabeled them. Like I said, this is a test, a beta version, so I'm still working on all the flaws. When it's released later this month, that will be taken care of. You can also add your lines. So say we want to add a couple lines so that we can go in and do LPI on this site. We can go ahead and add the lines. We can also go ahead and collect our GPS locations for those 3 lines and note the elevation. In addition, if we have one of the new USB Garmins hooked up to our tablet or laptop in the field, this database isn't set up for it because I can't use it in my building. It would give you the option of just clicking a button and it would auto-populate those fields based on the coordinates that that GPS is actually seeing at that point in time. So at this point, we are going to move on and actually talk about LPI. I find a lot of users actually do the LPI. It seems to be the most used method out there. So at this point, we can modify how we want to collect our LPI information in the plot default. So whether we want to collect it in metric or English units, how far apart we want the spacing, whether we want to collect height or not collect height, and whether we want to remind the user that, it has to be collected at every point or just whenever we've determined is the best distancing. There's also the option to permit non-zero height and top canopy. That happens occasionally because some agencies take height off of the line, so they might not actually be hitting a plant even though there's a plant on the line itself. When they take the height off the line, it's not hitting a plant, so we may or may not want that option. There's a checkbox option. Some individuals want to differentiate between green plants and dead plants, or different life stages of plants, things like that. So at this point, we'll just call them, well, we'll mark the dead ones. That'll be easier. We also have some new options, which aren't available in the current database. So we've taken into consideration the possibility that plants are buried either in terms of having like a water surface or an actual soil surface that then you find plants under. We've been working in some areas that have caused us, both Florida with the water issue, and then we've been working in Mongolia where we actually have buried plants because of movement of soil due to wind. So we now have this option of allowing soil, water, gravel, cobble, or stone as a lower choice, not a soil surface choice, but a lower surface code, and then you would have your plant underneath of that. So if you were collecting that sort of data, you would turn that on. Otherwise, you would leave it off. And we also have the option now of doing what we're calling a rapid LPI assessment, where you're still doing LPI, but you're very quickly collecting data at each point, only the top layer and the soil surface layer. It's more equivalent to a step point, but we prefer to call it a rapid assessment since we are taking it at the proper intervals and still doing it on a transect line. And we'll actually look at that in a moment. Today, or for this particular moment, we're just going to talk about a standard LPI. And I just want to talk about some of the possibilities. So once again, everything in bold has to be entered before you can actually enter data. So I'm just going to select myself and Bob as a recorder and observer, tell it that we're going to do this for line 1. And now at this point, we have not actually created a plant list for this particular site plot and line. So we're going to do that on the fly. We're going to go into the Edit Species and Plot by clicking on it. And we're going to, there's several ways we can do it. We can just bring up the drop-down list and select different plants. And by clicking Add, move them in. Or we can search multiple species. So maybe we know what the code starts with, and it'll bring up that list, much shorter list, much easier to negotiate. And we can select it, and we can select actually several plants, tell it OK, and then once again select Add so that they're actually in our plot species list at this point. We'll just select a few more just to make things interesting. We can also just click on the alphabetized list, and it will sort them for us. And I'm just randomly picking a few. Obviously, either in the field or before you go to the field, you would want to create a more substantial species list. But since we're just doing it on the fly this afternoon, we're just going to keep moving. So we've got a couple species. When we drop the drop-down menus, we can select our species. The other thing that you'll notice is that we have a couple new codes. So we now have a new code of ML, which stands for mobile lichen. We are running into situations where we have lichen on the landscape that is either being moved by wind or water, and that's what we're calling mobile lichen because it's not actually attached to the soil surface. So it's the same, it would be the equivalent of litter or woody litter. We're now calling it mobile lichen, ML. And that may or may not be occurring in your landscape, but it's something we feel was important to add. So we can add the data this way by dropping the menus. Or we can also do a quick data entry, and this is much better in the field. So if you've got a tablet and you're collecting the data, it's much, much faster to sit and click through rather than drop the menus each time. In order to move forward, you just click Next. If for some reason it's the exact same set of plants as before, we can just click Same as Last, and it will subpopulate with the last hit. This is more useful in areas where you don't actually have, you have a lot of none over soils or none litter over soils. It makes it much quicker for the person entering the data to just quickly click through Same as Last. The person entering the data should be aware, though, and self-check that the last entry was the entry that they wanted. In addition, you can type in the height. And once again, the checkboxes we were using as dead, and it reminds us of that at the top. It says checkboxes dead. So in case we forgot what we defined it as, it's right there to remember or to remind us. The other thing is there's the option to move selected codes to the top of the list. Some people find this useful, some people don't. Some people want the list alphabetized. Others prefer that the more you use a particular code, the more often it moves to the top of the list. So this is important when you have that list of 100 plants or more, and maybe you're just hitting 10 of them frequently, and the rest aren't that important, so the rest will stay alphabetized, and the top 10 will just be at the very top. But once again, it's up to the user if they wish to turn it on or off. Another option is that you can move. So say you get to the end of the line, and it tells you go to close out of it, and it tells you that not all points have been completed. You can go back into it and say, okay, well, I recall having an issue with, I don't know, position 30, and you can go back to 30, and sure enough, we didn't fill in the line, so of course it's empty, and you can re-enter that information. There's also some help information. So if you click Help on Codes, it will give you a breakdown, especially the soil surface codes. Sometimes we have issues remembering what those are or what the definitions in terms of the size for gravel or cobbles are. So it will pop that up for you. And you can also click on the Modified Plot Species list. Perhaps we came across a species that we didn't foresee being out on this plot. We can go back in, quickly add it, and continue with our data entry. And it'll be right there in the list. So I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to talk about the new rapid assessment quickly, just so that people are aware of what it is and what it can do. So it's the same setup as before. We enter all the bold information, it unlocks, and as you can see, only the top layer and the soil surface layer are available now for entry. And there is a new rule with this. So we realize that in terms of basal hits, you may hit a different plant, since you're only taking the very top in the soil surface, a different plant in the top layer versus the soil surface layer. So that rule is now been added so that you can actually, in this method, not for the regular LPI, but in this rapid assessment, you can actually have a different top layer and soil surface. And we only allow, at this point in time, this may change, but at this point we're only allowing the none and the plants themselves for the top layer, and for the soil surface layer, we're only allowing the soil option, which would incorporate everything, rocks, whatever you might hit. It all falls within soil or the plants themselves. So there's one other thing that I wanted to cover quickly, and I should have covered it when we were back in the supporting table. So I'm going to run back, and I'm going to go back to the support tables. It's a fairly new functionality, and I'm not sure how many people are aware that it exists. So if we go back into our state species list, something new that we've added is at the very bottom, this maintain growth habit, duration, and stabilizing. If we click on it, we now have the option of adding additional information. So we'll just click on this first one, this A-band at the top. We now have the option of deciding whether it's woody, non-woody, or other. And then based on that designation, actually we'll go to non-woody, we have the option of designating whether it's a forb or a graminoid, a grass. And we can select that, and it then subpopulates that information. You can also determine the duration, so maybe it's an annual or perennial or biennial, and apply that as well. And I apologize, I don't even know what I selected, so I'm just trying to show you how to go about doing it. I'm not actually saying that this particular plant is this. And I realize that the reason that we're allowing the user to do this instead of downloading this from the NRCS plants list is that different plants have different growth habits or durations depending on where you are, both in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. So that's why we're allowing the user to determine this information. And you can also say whether it's stabilizing or not. Obviously, in this case, it would not be stabilizing. So you can actually go through, obviously this is our whole plant list. This is 6,400 species. But what you would want to do is for the species that are important to you or that were actually used for your project, you would want to go in and identify them if it's important to you when you run the report to see how many forbs or how many grasses you're actually hitting on the landscape. And in addition to this, I wanted to show one other thing. So we're going to get back to the main menu. And if we go to the administrative function and ask it to do a data export and tell it to export all data to another database, we now have the option. So we tell it, yeah, we want to do all the data, find the oldest. We want to export that species table we were just talking about. And in particular, if we click export only the species table, that list that we've spent so much time and energy into identifying the plants in terms of annuals and perennials and forbs and shrubs and grasses, we can export that list into an empty database so that all that information that we've taken so much time to put together is saved. And maybe we want to use it for another project, so we can just export just the species list and import it into a fresh database and have all of that information available to the next project. So I'm not going to actually do the export here. If you're familiar with exporting and importing the databases, it's very easy. It's just a new option that will be available when the release comes out later this month. So I'm going to switch databases for a minute just so we can talk about one other option. I want to get into a database that actually has some data. So I'm just going to quickly, same database as we were in before. It just has some, essentially some fake data that I've pre-created. I just want to quickly talk about some of our new reporting options. So if we click on reports, and we're just going to run one for LPI, we can collect or select our site, plot, and lines. If we click on qualifying data, it shows us what data we've selected, essentially, in terms of the dates, the site plot and line IDs. And then we can go in and select our report. So I'm just going to quickly run a report, and then I'm going to talk about a few of the other reports. Ooh, and you know what? I just selected the wrong one. Sorry, wrong one. So I wanted the indicators report. So we have, this is actually available currently, and we've added a bunch of new indicators that will be coming out later this month. So we can select a few options in terms of what we're looking for. You may not want to select all the options, depending on how big your data set is. Sometimes Excel can get overwhelmed. It's not an Access issue, it's actually an Excel issue. But we'll just select a few just so you get an idea of what it's capable of doing. So I selected total foliar cover, annual plants, bare soil, rock, and then an itemization by species. And we'll go ahead and tell it to proceed with the report. And even though it's not a very big data set, it does take a few minutes to calculate. Well, not a few minutes, but it takes a little bit of time to calculate all of the things that we've asked it to do. So we have our metadata. It just tells us what the data was that we collected and the dates. It tells us all the species that occurred in the LPI lines and plots that we selected. It tells us what type of indicators we selected, and then we get down to the line totals. So the line totals give us the information that we selected, so the total foliar cover in terms of how many times it was a first hit, so that very top hit, versus any hit, so, and that's the average, excuse me, the first hit average. Obviously, the any hit for the total foliar cover and the top cover is going to be the same, so those numbers are just repeated. Annuals, we really, we did not hit significantly enough for it to actually be totaled. Bare soil, 4 hits, and then once again the average. And also it tells us by plant species how many times we hit it in the very top canopy, and the average of those hits versus any hit, which means that it could occur in the top or lower canopies. And then this data is rolled up into the plot totals. In this case, there was only one plot. Once again, we have averages and standard deviations for the first hits versus the any hits. And then that's rolled up again into the site totals. And this wasn't very interesting because I only selected one site and plot, but you get the idea of what it's capable of in terms of the averages and standard deviations. And then so we've also included some new reports. So since we now have this buried species option in the LPI, we actually created a separate report for that, and we also included a new report just for the ground cover indicators in terms of the different ground indicators you might be covering. We figured it was easier to break them out as a separate report so that you can actually look at different types of ground cover and whether it's under a plant or just out in the open and exposed. So once again, you can look at where the litter is being placed on the landscape, that sort of thing. So we won't go through those reports today. So at this point, we're going to get back into the PowerPoint slides. So there are several future web seminars being offered at the website listed below. In particular, there will be a new web seminar uncovering special features of DIMA offered on June 4th at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. In this particular web seminar, we are going to cover a much more in-depth database training, more in terms of kind of tips and tricks, things that people may not be aware of, things that unless you've gone and explored all the different options through the main menu, you may not realize that there are some really cool functions that would save you a lot of time and hassle. So we're trying to get the word out that those things are there and how to use them so that the database is more friendly and people actually understand what it offers. At this time, we would like you to take a few minutes to complete an online survey regarding the web seminar that has been presented to you today. So I'll give you a couple minutes, and then I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Hey, Erica, this is Jason.
Yes.
Why don't we go ahead and see if folks have questions now? And
Okay,
can,
sure. Does anyone have any questions?
While they're filling out their survey.
Does anyone have any questions?
Do you have a copy of your PowerPoint that I can get printed off?
Erica?
Just the actual PowerPoint I just ran through?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I can email it to you.
Okay.
Do you want, I can give you my email address, and then if you zap me an email, I'll just zap it right back to you.
Okay.
Would that be all right? So my email address is ericha@nmsu.edu. And in addition to, it may not be this week. A bunch of us are busy, and some people are leaving town. Oh, go ahead. Jason? Okay. And in addition to that, probably the beginning of next week, a copy of...
well, I sent the email address out in the chat.
Oh, you did? Oh, sorry, I'm not on that screen.
And so how do we get to the survey? I must have missed it.
Oh, I'll put that back up on the screen. So if you go to the website listed right there on the screen, the Survey Monkey. So
well, I'm not having any luck accessing it.
I probably hold the same for the rest of us, too.
Oh, you're not having luck with the survey?
No.
Oh, because I tested it earlier.
And I know it worked real well the last webinar that we did, but for some reason it's not working today.
Huh. I apologize about that. I even tested it, and I copied and pasted it.
Well, it doesn't seem to be an active link that I can click on and make something happen.
Oh, yes, I may not have properly linked it in Access. Jason, do you want to put that up so that they can just copy and paste it out of the chat? Let me see if I can do it.
Well, you can actually click right on it from the chat. You don't actually have to copy and paste it.
Okay, but so he popped it up in the chat for you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the other thing that I was mentioning previously is that probably at the beginning of next week, we will have this entire training posted on the in the help section of the methods guide. And I hope to have a link also on the database website itself.
I think we'll probably have, I'm speaking for myself, I'll have more questions about it once I get into the database. I like its utility, and I think I may have actually looked at some of it before this meeting, but not having the opportunity to really use it, I don't have any questions right now.
Oh, and that's fine. And I understand that. My contact information is all over that particular website.
Sure.
So if at any point in time you have any feedback, any comments, any problems or questions, by all means, drop me an email or give me a call. I'm more than happy to interact with the public and get them up and running. And sometimes, unfortunately, bugs do slip through, so sometimes it is something that needs to be brought to our attention so that we can fix it if it's a bug, or we need something that we've overlooked that we should have incorporated into one of the methods, or something that would just make life easier for the people collecting the data in the field. So we very much welcome feedback. Did anyone else have a question?
will you say again the contact information for the SRM CEU?
Oh, that's Jason Carl, and I can actually scroll back a couple screens for you. His email address is jcarl, so JKARL, @nmsu.edu.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no problem.